My name is Carol. I am 69 years old. I have my tea right here on the small side table next to me. It is a very gray, overcast morning in Greenville today, and the light coming through the living room window is terribly flat. I want to talk about something that took me an embarrassingly long time to admit out loud. When you plan a retirement, you almost always plan it for two people. You sit down together at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. You spread out all the paperwork and the tax returns. You look at the Social Security estimates that come in the mail. You look at the combined retirement savings and the pension projections. You talk about living on a fixed income and what that actually means for your daily life. You imagine two entire lifetimes stretching out ahead of you on a shared timeline. You talk about Medicare premiums and supplemental insurance. You talk about finally paying off the mortgage and how freeing that will feel. You talk about what the adult children might need from you, maybe helping with a wedding or a down payment. You build this massive, complicated financial architecture over the course of decades, and it is all designed entirely to support two specific people living under one roof, sharing the same expenses. And then one day, it is just you. That is exactly what happened to me. My husband Frank died. We had the whole thing meticulously mapped out. Frank was a civil engineer for the county for 35 years. He loved a good solid plan more than almost anything. But suddenly I was looking at exactly half the income we expected to have. I was looking at all of the empty house, all of the utility bills, and all of the maintenance costs. Any financial planner in the world would tell you that a sudden transition like that is incredibly dangerous for your stability. They would probably be completely right about that. I sat at my kitchen table a few weeks after the funeral with a giant pile of manila folders. I felt completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of paperwork. I did not know how to do the math for just one person. I did not know if I had enough savings left to cover the property taxes and the grocery bills for the next 20 years. I did not know how to create a new budget from scratch because I had never had to do it before. And nobody is being honest about what that actually looks like in real life. People talk about the emotional grief all the time, and they send cards and casseroles. But they do not talk about the sheer panic of opening a bank statement alone. They do not tell you how terrifying the numbers become when nobody is sitting across the table double-checking your math. You wake up in the morning and the house is entirely silent. You walk down the hallway and you notice how incredibly loud your own footsteps are on the hardwood floor. And that feels so heavy. It is not a peaceful kind of quiet. It is just a heavy, empty quiet that seems to press down on you. You walk into the kitchen and you do not make coffee. I actually switched entirely to tea after he passed away. The smell of brewing coffee just reminded me too much of Frank, standing there in his robe. I would stand by the stove waiting for the water to boil for my tea. I would listen to the kettle hiss. I would just think endlessly about the bills coming due. I would look out the kitchen window at the backyard and think about the property taxes. I thought about the homeowner's insurance premiums going up every single year. I was terrified of making a catastrophic mistake that would ruin me financially. I was so afraid I would ruin the careful financial foundation Frank spent his entire adult life building for us. I thought I would forget to pay something crucial and the electricity would get shut off. I thought the money would just slowly drain away without me even noticing. I did not have him there to watch the accounts anymore. The mail would come every afternoon. I would take it out of the box and just leave it sitting on the kitchen counter for days at a time. Opening a white envelope with just my name printed on the front felt physically impossible. I am not going to give you a 5-step system for surviving financial widowhood today. I do not have a spreadsheet template to sell you or a course you need to buy. I am just going to tell you exactly what happened when I finally found the courage to open his computer. I am going to tell you what we figured out together over the years, and I will tell you what I am still figuring out by myself right now. Because this is the part nobody puts in the glossy retirement brochures they hand out at the bank. I was sitting right here in this exact living room armchair. It was Frank's chair for years before it became the chair I use for filming these videos. I started sitting in it after he died because it felt comfortable, and then it just became my spot. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The house was absolutely freezing cold. I had not figured out how he programmed the digital thermostat yet, and I was too stubborn to ask for help. I had his heavy laptop open on my knees. I finally guessed his password after trying his birthday and our anniversary. Frank was always the planner in our marriage, and I was always the talker. We had a system that worked beautifully for 40 years. He did the complicated spreadsheets, and I did the difficult conversations with the kids or the neighbors. When he died, I inherited the spreadsheets. That took a tremendous amount of getting used to. I opened the file named Retirement Master on his desktop. It was a massive document that took several seconds just to load. I stared at these endless rows of tiny numbers glowing on the screen. He had columns for absolutely everything you could possibly imagine. He projected our grocery costs out for 20 entire years. He accounted for an assumed rate of inflation. He had a whole separate tab dedicated just to visiting the national parks. We planned to travel the country together once I retired, too. Frank had a long list of parks he wanted to see. That list is still written down in a worn notebook I keep in the drawer. Looking at that glowing screen in the freezing living room, I realized something incredibly important. The math had not disappeared just because he did. The financial structure was still exactly where he left it for me. I just had to learn how to read the language he wrote it in. I had to learn how to live inside that structure by myself. I had to figure out what those numbers meant for me alone, without him beside me. That was the exact moment I decided to save a copy of the file for myself. I clicked on the very top row of the document. I updated the header to say Carol's numbers, but I kept everything else exactly the same as he left it. That was my true starting line. That was the day I finally stopped avoiding the mail on the counter. So I want to go through 5 things I have noticed about this entire process. 5 very specific things about doing the new math alone in retirement. I want to be honest with you about the exact numbers because I truly think being vague is not helpful to anyone watching. I want to share the things I wish someone had told me about living on a single retirement income before I had to learn them the hard way. I am going to tell you the plain, slightly uncomfortable reality of it all. These are the things you have to figure out when the original plan changes so drastically. The first thing is about the actual monthly income. I want to tell you exactly what comes in so you understand the reality of my situation. Right now, I have about $3,130 coming in every single month. I get my own pension from the school district where I worked. That is exactly $1,240. I was a 3rd grade teacher in Terre Haute, Indiana for a very long time. I worked incredibly hard for those years, dealing with parents and grading papers late into the night. That money feels completely like mine, and I am proud of it. But the much bigger piece of the puzzle is the Social Security survivor benefit. That is $1,890 a month. When that first survivor benefit deposit hit my checking account, I sat at the kitchen table and cried for an hour. I did not cry because it was not enough money to live on. I cried because of what that specific deposit represented. Every single time I see that $1,890 line item on my bank statement, I remember exactly why I am getting it. Frank worked as a civil engineer for 35 years. He drove to the county office every single morning. He paid into that system his entire working life. He retired exactly 6 months before he died. He only had 6 good months of freedom. He had his morning walks around the neighborhood and his little projects in the garage. He cooked dinner for me when I got home from my consulting work. And then it was just over in an instant. He barely got to touch the money he spent his whole life earning. So now I get it instead. And for a very long time, I felt incredibly guilty spending even a single dime of it. I would go to the local pharmacy to buy a simple bottle of aspirin or my daily vitamins. I would hold the plastic bottle in my hand and think about Frank working in the rain to pay for it. It felt like I was stealing from his hard work just to maintain my own life. I could not shake that awful feeling of guilt. I talked to my older sister Patty about this specific problem. Patty lives up in Indianapolis. She was widowed about 8 years ago. I always call her my advanced scout because she has already navigated all these terrible milestones. We talk on the phone every Thursday evening without fail. Patty listened to me cry on the phone about the pharmacy trip. My sister is a very practical woman. She told me to stop being foolish immediately. She said that money was his absolute last act of taking care of me. She told me not to insult his memory by refusing the help he left behind. That is when I figured out that a survivor benefit is not a lottery winning you should feel guilty about. It is a protective wall your spouse spent decades building specifically to keep you safe. You do not have to feel guilty for standing safely behind the wall. You just have to maintain it and respect it. I remember going down to the Social Security office downtown to set the whole thing up. My daughter Jen came with me that morning. Jen is 44 years old. She lives over in Charlotte, which is about 90 minutes away from my house. Jen is a natural problem solver, just like her father was. When Frank died, she organized absolutely everything for me. She handled the funeral arrangements and the endless stacks of paperwork. She organized the meals people brought over. She is protective of me in a way that sometimes feels a little bit like middle management. We sat together in those terrible, hard plastic chairs at the Federal Building for 2 hours. She brought a thick plastic binder with her. She had color-coded tabbed sections for death certificates and marriage licenses. I just felt completely numb sitting under those fluorescent lights. The woman behind the thick safety glass was actually very kind to us. She typed on her loud keyboard for a very long time. She explained the entire conversion process to Jen. She explained that I would step up to Frank's higher benefit amount and lose my own smaller benefit. It is all just simple, cold math to them. Jen wrote everything down efficiently in her notebook. I just stared at the blank beige wall behind the desk the entire time. I realized right then that my income was permanently capped forever. There was no more extra shift to pick up. There was no promotion to work toward. This was the exact perimeter of my financial life for the rest of my days. It terrified me sitting in that waiting room. But it does not terrify me now. The perimeter is set, and I just have to live within it. The second thing I noticed was the absolute blessing of having a paid-off mortgage and the complete curse of solo home maintenance. Frank paid off our house completely in 2018. It was entirely his idea to throw all our extra money at the principal. I am deeply grateful for his foresight every single month when the first day rolls around. My property taxes and my homeowner's insurance together are about $310 a month. My utilities for water and electricity are around $160. Without a monthly mortgage payment, keeping this house warm and safe costs very little. But the house absolutely does not take care of itself. That was the biggest surprise for me. When you live with someone for several decades, you naturally divide the household labor. You do not even discuss it anymore after a certain point. You just automatically do your respective parts. Frank handled cleaning out the gutters every autumn. He handled figuring out the weird clanking noises the furnace made in January. He handled mowing the lawn all summer. It was a beautiful Saturday in October when he was mowing the lawn in the backyard. That is when the cardiac event happened. I found him there. I do not talk about that specific day on this channel. I already said the hardest thing out loud once. I do not need to say it again for the internet. But the grass in the backyard kept growing whether I was grieving or not. The spring after he died, the yard turned into an absolute jungle of weeds. I finally had to swallow my pride and hire a professional lawn service. That was a brand new monthly expense I had never once budgeted for. Then a pipe started leaking badly under the kitchen sink. I opened the wooden cabinet and just stared at the giant puddle spreading across the floorboards. I did not own a proper wrench. I did not even know where he kept the wrenches in the messy garage. I had to call a local plumber out of the phone book. He charged me $150 just to tighten a single loose bolt. I felt completely foolish writing him that check. I actually tried to fix the very next broken thing all by myself. The guest bathroom toilet kept running constantly and driving up the water bill. I sat at the computer and watched 3 different instructional videos on the internet. I drove all the way across town to the big hardware store. I wandered down the massive plumbing aisle for 20 minutes feeling completely lost. I finally bought a little rubber flapper part. I brought it home feeling very proud of myself. I took the heavy ceramic lid off the toilet tank and set it on the floor. I got my hands completely covered in cold, rusty water. I tried to snap the new rubber piece into place, just like the man in the video did. I pushed too hard and managed to break the plastic arm completely off the mechanism. I flooded the entire bathroom floor in seconds. The cold water soaked right through my socks. I sat down right there on the wet tile and laughed until I cried. Frank would have had a very strong opinion about my plumbing skills. He always had an opinion about how to fix things correctly. That is when I figured out that a paid-off house is only truly free if you actually know how to fix it yourself. I had to add a brand new line item to my master spreadsheet. I called it the monthly repair fund. I put a set amount of money in there every single month without fail. It buys me peace of mind when things inevitably break. I do not feel bad about calling the expensive repairman anymore. I just write the check and pay the bill. Jen thinks I should sell this big house and move into a smaller condo in Charlotte near her. She checks in on me frequently to ask about it. Sometimes it is a little too frequently for my taste. I love my daughter completely, but occasionally I desperately need an afternoon without the constant check-ins. I tell her gently that I am not selling the house just yet. I am asking the question out loud in these videos because I still do not know the answer. But for now, it is still my house. The third thing is the grocery budget. It is all about the strange process of learning how to feed exactly one person. My grocery bill right now is about $280 a month. That probably sounds very low to some people watching this. But it is incredibly hard to spend more than that when you are only buying food for yourself. Absolutely everything at the standard grocery store is packaged for large, hungry families. You walk down the produce aisle and everything is enormous. You buy a normal loaf of bread and half of it goes bad immediately before you can eat it. You buy a plastic bag of fresh spinach and it turns to green mush in the crisper drawer within 3 days. For the entire first year after Frank died, I ate terribly. I would pour a bowl of dry cereal for dinner at 7 o'clock. I would eat a cold piece of toast standing directly over the kitchen sink so I would not make a crumb on the counter. Cooking a real hot meal just felt entirely pointless to me. You spend an hour washing and chopping vegetables and stirring a heavy pot. Then you sit down at the big kitchen table entirely by yourself. The silence in the dining room is very loud when you are eating alone. You can actually hear your own fork scraping against the ceramic plate. Frank loved to cook on the weekends. He used to make this incredibly complicated spicy chili. It took him all day Saturday to make it right. The entire house would smell wonderful for an entire weekend. A few months ago, I finally decided I was going to try to make his famous chili. I dug through his recipe box and found his stained recipe card. I went to the store and bought all the very specific ingredients he always insisted on using. I spent all Sunday afternoon chopping onions at the counter. My eyes were watering the entire time. I browned the ground meat carefully in his heavy cast iron pot. I simmered it slowly on the stove, exactly the way he always did. I ladled a big portion into a bowl and carried it to the table. I sat down and took a hopeful bite. It was completely wrong. It did not taste anything like his chili at all. I do not fully understand why, but the flavor was just completely flat and disappointing. I have been trying to make his chili for a while now. It is still not right yet, but the actual physical process of trying changed things for me. I realized that I actually missed the rhythm of chopping vegetables. I liked having something warm simmering on the stove again. It made the quiet house feel alive and purposeful. It made the kitchen feel like a real kitchen again, instead of just a waiting room. I started buying much smaller portions at the butcher counter. I politely asked the butcher to wrap up a single chicken breast for me. I started immediately freezing half of whatever meal I made. I absolutely stopped eating my dinner standing over the kitchen sink. I started setting a proper place at the dining table every single evening. I use a real woven placemat. I use a clean cloth napkin instead of a paper towel. That is when I figured out that cooking is not just about consuming calories to stay alive. It is about actively maintaining your own dignity. You have to firmly decide that you are worth the physical effort of preparing a hot meal. You are worth dirtying a heavy pan and washing it afterward. You have to convince yourself that one single person is enough of an audience for a good, warm dinner. My grocery budget is quite small, but it is very intentional now. I simply do not waste food anymore. It feels like a small win, but navigating retirement alone is mostly just stringing together small wins day after day. You figure out how to freeze the bread. You figure out how to make the chili better. You just keep moving forward. The fourth thing is what happens at the very end of the month. It is about the leftover money and the lingering fear that never quite goes away. When you tally it all up on the spreadsheet, my total essential expenses are usually around $1,444. I pay my monthly Medicare supplement premium, which is $187. I pay my car insurance and my gas for the month, which runs about $130. I pay my cellular phone bill, which is $48. I'd gladly give $80 to my local church and community charities. Attending church got significantly more important to me after Frank died, and I needed a place to be on Sunday mornings. So if you subtract my basic living expenses from my total fixed income, I have about $1,686 left over at the end of the month. I immediately put $800 straight into my high-yield savings account. I keep the remaining $886 in checking as flexible spending money. I know perfectly well that having this much left over makes me incredibly lucky. I am deeply aware that I am much luckier financially than many widows my age, and I try to mention it so I stay grounded. I truly consider this leftover amount more than enough to live a good life. I have a very safe financial cushion beneath me. I am not struggling to keep the lights on or pay for my prescriptions. But the subtle uncertainty of living alone does not completely vanish just because the math works out. I look at my monthly Medicare supplement premium statement. I wonder anxiously how much it will go up next year when the rates change. The entire American healthcare system is completely baffling to me. I simply do not understand how they calculate these complicated premiums. I worry constantly about eventually needing expensive long-term care in a facility. I absolutely refuse to become a financial or physical burden on my adult children. My son David lives all the way out in Portland, Oregon. He works incredibly hard as a landscape architect. He is 41 years old now. David calls me on the phone every single Sunday evening without fail. That was Frank's weekly habit with his own mother. David passed it down to himself without us ever having a formal discussion about it. David is a bit softer in his approach than Jen is. He is much more comfortable just sitting quietly with me in difficult feelings without trying to fix them immediately. When I have a particularly hard or lonely week, I usually call David. A few weeks ago, I was having a mild panic attack at the kitchen table about money. There was absolutely no specific reason for the panic. I just suddenly felt completely overwhelmed by the crushing reality of being the only person in charge of everything. I looked at the complicated spreadsheet and all the tiny numbers just blurred together into a meaningless gray smudge. I picked up my phone and called David in Oregon. He did not offer to build me a better spreadsheet. He did not try to manage my anxiety with logic. He just gently asked me about Frank. He is the only person in the family who does that regularly. He asked me what his dad would have done in this exact situation. I told David that his dad would have calmly checked the math twice. I said Frank would have eventually found a tiny rounding error in column B and told me to just relax and drink my tea. David laughed at that. He told me to just do exactly that. He told me I was doing completely fine. He has a beautiful daughter named Nora. She is 6 years old now. She has Frank's exact blue-gray eyes. I have mentioned this before on the channel. That is when I figured out that true financial security is not just a high number sitting in a bank account. It is having the right people you can call when you completely forget how to do the math. It is having people who remind you of who you were before you were so scared of the future. When we originally planned this retirement, we planned it as a team. Now I am doing all the planning completely alone. The raw math is exactly the same as it was before. Everything else in my life is completely different. But knowing the people on the other end of the phone are the same helps more than the savings account sometimes. The fifth thing is about the future. It is about dealing with the blank spaces left on the master spreadsheet. I mentioned Frank's detailed list for visiting the national parks earlier. We had a whole exciting timeline built out for our late 60s. He retired from the county in January 2019. I was planning to follow him into retirement in 2021. We were going to buy a small, comfortable travel trailer. We were going to drive all the way out to Yellowstone National Park first. We talked about that trip constantly in the evenings. After he died so suddenly, I immediately went back to work. I did not go back because I had to financially. The survivor benefits and the life insurance were already there. I went back because I desperately needed somewhere to be every morning. The part-time education consulting work became an absolute lifeline for my sanity. It gave me a concrete reason to put real professional clothes on. It forced me to leave the silent house and actually talk to other living people. But when March 2021 finally arrived, I retired from consulting. I retired exactly as planned on the original schedule, but with absolutely no one to retire with. I took the specific date from Frank's spreadsheet and I stubbornly kept it. It felt somehow like keeping a sacred promise to him, even though the original promise was meant for both of us.